This is the Defenders podcast on TV Podcast Industries, and we're exploring Marvel 616, Episode 4, Lost and Found. Welcome back once again, fellow Defenders, to our Marvel podcast on TV Podcast Industries. We're continuing our bite-sized coverage of Marvel 616, the anthology documentary available on Disney+. We're so excited to get back to Marvel in 2021 that we wanted to cover something Marvel before WandaVision begins on the 15th of January. So John decided to jump into the documentary series, Marvel 616. I've really been enjoying it so far.
Yeah, it's been really good. And this one, Episode 4, Lost and Found, is, I think, the most different of at least the first four, as we were watching through the 8-episode Disney Plus series.
Yeah.
This to me was the most different, and in the end, I really ended off enjoying this one, directed by Paul Scheer.
Yeah, it's a really interesting one. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast over at tvpodcastindustries.com, and you'll get access to all of these podcasts and our upcoming coverage of WandaVision and all the other shows that we've covered, and TV shows and movies that we've covered over the last couple of years of podcasting. We'd also love to hear your thoughts. If you want to email us to feedback@tvpodcastindustries.com, let us know what you've been thinking about Marvel 616, what you're excited for coming up in 2021, and hopefully that you've been enjoying the podcast as well. We'd love to hear from you and let us know what you think. John, will we jump into our bite-sized coverage of Lost and Found?
Definitely, yes.
So what's the kind of overview of this one? This is Paul Scheer. I know him as a podcaster. Mostly I've seen him in so many movies. He's kind of an actor that's been in so many things. You'd certainly recognize his face. I know him as a podcaster on a podcast called How Does This Get Made? Very funny concept for a podcast. It's looking at movies that didn't do spectacularly well. And the idea is, well, how did it fall apart? How did this idea that somebody said, I'm going to give a couple of million quid to make into a movie?
Well, yeah.
How did it fall apart? How did it convince someone to get that money in the first place? And how did it fall apart and not make the money back effectively? It was a great idea to begin with. I think towards the end of the time I was listening to it, it had turned into a live stage show and had a bit too much promotion in it, so it was like every 5 minutes they seemed to be reading out an advert, and I kind of felt it was that they'd lost the fun of the podcast part of it. But I did love Paul Scheer on that show. He's a very funny comedian, very, very funny as a presenter, and I think he's taken his mind for how things work over to Marvel. So what's the central thing that he's doing here?
Yeah,
John?
I mean, look, in essence, from the documentary side of it, this looks at the minor or, back characters in the Marvel catalogue. But at its most weird, it is almost a meta documentary that is really a comedic spoof pilot pitch within this documentary looking at minor characters. And so really here it's Paul Scheer looking to bring back this sort of B-list character into another kind of artistic form, in this case animation, and going through that process.
Yeah, there's always this joke, that nobody recognizes the characters that Marvel put on screen, and then once they put them on screen, it's like, oh wow, everybody knows who these people are. Iron Man would have been considered probably a second-tier character when they released the first movie of Iron Man. Now the whole universe of Marvel movies is out there, featuring loads of characters that people may not have heard of before they came to the screen. So the joke here with Paul Scheer is that he wants to find the most obscure character to put that character and give them kind of the promotion that they may not get otherwise.
Exactly.
Now, I would say, looking at the way that he's formed this story into this documentary, it's not far off the truth. Like, I don't think anybody would go out to say, I'm going to find the most obscure character and see if I can turn them into something that Marvel will do. But for a lot of the people behind the TV shows, they will find their favorite character who maybe people haven't heard of, but it will be their favorite character to begin with.
Definitely.
And then they'll be asked, Disney has done this with their TV shows, and Netflix used to do it with their shows, where they would ask somebody to come in and give a treatment to a character that has been chosen to get the TV treatment, for example.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think definitely this episode is in two parts. The first part does feel the most documentary-like, where Paul Scheer is interviewing three comic book writers. You've got Reginald Hudlin, who did Black Panther. You have Donny Cates, who did Venom, but also Doctor Strange.
Yes, Donny Cates well.
And also Gerry Duggan, who did
the recent Big Defenders book, didn't he?
Yeah, and I think famously Deadpool. And they kind of talk about different things here, and it's kind of interesting. You know, Reginald Hudlin talks about, you know, taking underutilized heroes and effectively reinventing them. And the example he gives is X-Men, where they were effectively going to be canned after 100 issues. It wasn't making the inroads, and they were taken on in a different way. And also the way Reginald Hudlin took on Black Panther. And, you know, he says in the documentary, I wanted to make it provocative and political.
Yeah.
That was the essence, and that changed up Black Panther. And I thought that was a really interesting take. And then you have Donny Cates, who talks about the reinvention of characters, and the example he gives is Wolverine. I suppose you could also have within this as well Son of Satan, which is another thing he talks about, which is effectively Hellstrom.
Which got its own TV show this year.
Yeah, exactly. And reinventing these characters and adding different perspective and bringing them something different or bigger, and really changing them up. And then you have Gerry Duggan talking about really sort of mining peripheral characters or B-list characters, a bit like what Paul Scheer is doing here. I mean, he talks about, you know, there's a number of things being talked about here. I think, like Damage Control, which are the non-superhero team that go up to clean up after the superheroes have effectively laid waste to some city in some form.
Do you remember when we were on the Marvel Netflix stuff, there was actually talk of a Damage Control series
there
coming?
Was,
it was absolutely set in stone. This was going to be their comedy TV show that they were going to do from Marvel. It was going to be Damage Control. And I can't remember why it was cancelled in the end. I think there was kind of this thought of, should Marvel jump into doing a comedy TV show at this stage? Now, I think upcoming, I think I've heard that the She-Hulk show is going to be a 30-minute comedy in a lawyer's office, effectively, is the concept behind that. So they've still been looking for that property that they want as a comedy.
Yeah.
But interesting that the Damage Control one was in there. Damage Control as a concept, I think, was the one that came into Spider-Man Homecoming, the first Spider-Man movie. They're the ones that took over the operation to clean up after all the damage that had happened in New York from the Vulture's character.
Yes.
Effectively. That's what turned him into the Vultures. So Damage Control has actually made it to the screen, which I think is really interesting. But I do love that this idea from Gerry Duggan, where he's kind of going, look for those peripheral characters that some people are aware of and try and see if you can do something big and different.
I think one of the interesting ones for me, he talks about Dr. Druid, the bargain basement sorcerer supreme. The way Gerry Duggan describes it is, you know, this hilarious backstory where effectively he is given magical powers by the Ancient One because the Ancient One just wants to be left alone by him. He's annoying him. But, you know, recently he's been used in Mark Waid's Doctor Strange run.
That's
so
right.
that it, you know, they do make it there. And the most bizarre one from the 80s is US Trucker, a CB radio receiver, when he presses his tongue onto his fillings after experimental surgery, after a crash with his brother following, you know, where he's driven off a cliff, and immediately gets experimental surgery, and the whole run of issues ends up with him driving a truck in space. And so, completely way out there. But I think the second part of this episode then focuses very much on Paul Scheer choosing a group of characters called Brute Force, which was a 4-issue run in the 1980s. And basically they are described as the animal Avengers that protect the environment. There's a dolphin, a lion, an eagle, a kangaroo, and a bear. And and you know, they kind of asked the question, why was this 4-issue done, and what can we do to reinvigorate them? And you know, Paul Scheer goes through effectively the special projects editor from the 1980s, and when you look at what he was involved with at Marvel, it was Star Wars, G.I. Joe, and Transformers. Very successful spin-outs. But the interesting thing that he kind of talks about, and is kind of backed up by the writer, Simon Furman, who he interviews as well, is that, you know, it was supposed to be eco-themed, very loose setup, but it was the likes of G.I. Joe, the likes of Transformers. It was toys being put into comics. And what they wanted was to create a comic series that would translate into toys. So these animals become very bionic, so that they can be turned into toys.
They are hilarious.
And,
I must say, I do
it's
love
really
that.
interesting.
Yeah, I do love that piece from the special projects editor on Marvel, where it's basically saying, I used to have 20 of these come across my desk every year, and I just choose a writer and an artist to go on the project. I love that he's kind of saying, I don't have any power as to who commissions this stuff. Somebody contacts us and says, you need to do the special project, and my job is to deliver the special project. It's kind of a thankless job, but if it hits really hard, I suppose. It's kind of the thing. So I did like that. That's your job, is don't question what we're telling you to do. You just need to go and find a good writer to write it and a good artist to cover it over, so we get it out there.
That's it. And I mean, ultimately, Paul Scheer then takes these characters, he tests the idea at Comic-Con, and the interesting thing about that is, if you take it on face value, then everyone said this could be really neat. I thought that was really interesting, and I'm assuming it wasn't staged in any way for the documentary, but it could have been.
I feel like it might have been, yes.
But he tests the idea at San Diego Comic-Con. He gets the animation studio involved to begin to sort of put, meat on the bones of these characters, voice actors, and you have this really funny little segment of the documentary where they're running through the different characters. I think Boomer the kangaroo is an assassin, but she bounces, so the idea that there'll be too much noise in trying to sneak up someone because you have boing, boing, boing. You've got Dr. Echo, which is the dolphin that has an Uzi.
And a doctorate.
And a doctorate. You've got Lionheart, the lion, Saw, the eagle, who has jets on him, and then the bear.
Yeah. I do love, again, this whole segment of pulling apart the immediate flaws in every one of these characters. It's just so much fun. Again, the eagle with rockets that make him fly more. I can already fly, but if I have rockets on me, I can fly even more and even faster.
he looks at the toy design, and everyone remembers the gauntlet from Avengers Endgame. And that toy that came out, and they were looking about doing the bear claw. And that you could, because they're eco, then they could use the claws to furrow little, channels in soil to plant seeds and you're just kind of going, okay, this is just nuts. But ultimately they create a pilot, and, it ends up with Paul Scheer, sitting down in front of the Disney, creatives to pitch the idea of this, and you get a nice little kind of minute long animation of brute force being reinvented, and I thought this was actually really quite nice. And as I say, this was the one that I just had no idea which way it was going. I mean, you immediately think this is just going to be them running through B-list minor characters like you had in the first part, which was massively interesting.
It was great fun,
It took it to another level by then trying to bring a set of these characters back to the mainstream and going through that process of how you do it. Because, like you say, Iron Man, in a sense, wasn't something everyone was raging about until the movie.
Yeah, he always had a book, at least, I suppose. So I don't want to underplay how popular a character Iron Man was, but it was that Marvel had sold off all their mainstream characters to be made by other companies for their movies, and suddenly they were kind of left with those lower tier characters that didn't have the most massive, they didn't have the Spider-Man following. But people often undersell that. Iron Man definitely still had a following in comic books, but not at the level of Spider-Man. But I love this concept of taking, this is how weird comics were in the 80s. These people got a 4-issue set, and then having a load of comedians pull them apart because they come up with some really funny ideas, and then seeing if you could actually deliver on creating a cartoon out of this. That moment where he's talking to the animation studio and writes a number on a piece of paper and goes, how much should I get for this? And you can tell by Paul Scheer's kind of acting in the moment, he's trying to kind of say, I'm hoping for a 6-episode series out of this, and they go, you could get maybe 1 or 2 minutes of animation for that. Really good stuff.
Yeah. So this is the most surprising one for me. so far, and I think I really, really enjoyed it. It was good fun. I think it just changed up how you would do this lost and found in a different way. It did it in a different way that actually made it much more engaging, because you then start to think, well, okay, is this what they, how they reinvigorate the likes of, some of the bigger characters that we now have, how they brought them more to the fore, and just hearing historically about Wolverine, where they say he looked like a pussycat and they made him more kind of like extreme with the claws,
and the claws looked like they were part of the gloves.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So really kind of a nice look at this sort of murkier or lost world of Marvel characters.
Yeah. And as comic fans, both myself and John, particularly our favourite characters from comic books, we've been subject to this quite a lot over the years. Both Doctor Strange and Nick Fury, our two favourite characters, have come and gone over the years. Someone has a good idea, brings the comic book to life for 6 or 7 issues, and then they disappear for 4 or 5 years, and then they just do guest appearances in other books, that kind of stuff. So we've seen this as fans of very particular characters. I know there was a really good reinvention of Nick Fury Jr. recently by the artists ACO and James Robinson, and it was kind of a concept of having Nick Fury Jr. drawn in the Steranko style from the 70s, which is Nick Fury's most popular period. So a really cool idea of reinventing the character. Sadly only lasted 10 issues, but loved every minute of that. So I love when my characters that I really like, are kind of reinvented, and trying to see if you can get them back into the mind of new kids reading comic books. So I know Doctor Strange has been reinvented so many times that you're sick of hearing his origin story.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it is one of those things. The origin story of Doctor Strange is just a classic, and it is really strong. Yeah. And the problem is, it almost like he got trapped by that, and so any retelling had to go through that. And I always felt that just wanted to see him sort of breathe and live beyond that more. And I think actually with the Doctor Strange movie, and certainly I suppose moving forward, it seems like possibly he's taking the Tony Stark role for the Phase 4. Who knows? I don't know. It's just conjecture. But I know with Jason Aaron's Last Days of Magic, and then Damnation with Donny Cates, and now with the Sorcerer Supreme in space, but also then the next iteration Surgeon Supreme by Mark Waid. Yeah. It's really kind of expanded the feeling of Doctor Strange, which I absolutely loved. It's really kind of expanded the world with Zelma and also the Ghost Basset Hound as well, So I love...
We have Strange Academy as well.
Strange Academy.
Loads going on with Doctor Strange now, definitely. And I know when a little private secret between you listeners and us, when John came out of Doctor Strange, the movie, he said, I absolutely love this. Finally, it's done now. They've finished the origin story. Now they can move on. That was kind of his overall review of Doctor Strange. I love the movie. It was great. But the origin story's done. Now we can have another story with Doctor Strange. And we've waited 5 years. We're going to get it in 2022, hopefully, if the world goes well. But this part of the documentary was definitely my favourite part of it.
Yeah.
I did love the documentary overall, but this part where he's talking to three really great writers, talking about picking characters and bringing them back over and over again, for me, that was my favourite part, because I've seen that so often with my favourite character, Nick Fury.
Exactly. So, and I think just, the difference in Lost and Found, it can be the B-list characters, but it can be more mainstream characters that lose their way in terms of the writing.
Exactly.
But are found again by new writers coming in with different perspectives, which I think is what episode 3 and 2 do, through the artwork and through the writers, that they bring something, a fresh perspective, a different angle to it. So again, another really nice little episode from Marvel 616 series.
Excellent. Thanks so much once again for joining us for the 4th episode of Marvel 616. It's 8 in total of Marvel 616. I don't know whether you're watching all of them or whether you're just dipping in and out of the ones that you're interested in, but so far, all 4 of them we've really enjoyed, and thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, we will be back next for Marvel 616 episode 5, Suit Up, which is all about people enjoying cosplaying their favorite characters, which I have to say I'm really looking forward to. I think having gone to New York Comic Con and seeing what the cosplayers can do is just phenomenal. It's so good. And just really intricate designs to really, people starting out, but making something really, really great, and some just being so simple that it sort of transcends cleverness. I think, what was it? The diamond above the head, and it was a sim, and that's really good. That's like, you just go, I like it.
Very impressive.
So
definitely, if you've been to a big comic convention, you'll definitely recognize how talented some of the cosplayers can be. It's amazing. And throughout the series so far, throughout these 4 episodes, I think we've had a moment where there's been cosplayers shown throughout them. So in the writing episode, they were talking about writers going to Comic-Cons for the first time and seeing the character they created on a page for 3 months before, and suddenly people are there at comic conventions dressed up as this new favorite character brought to life. So I'm really intrigued to see what this one's going to be like. Again, thanks so much for joining us. We'll talk to you again next time.
Yeah, thanks so much for joining us, fellow defenders. Remember, keep watching, keep listening, and keep defending.
Bye.
Bye.